Shang-Chi is a story about family, but it's not the same as a story like Black Widow or Guardians of the Galaxy, where the theme is of a found family. Shang-Chi tells the story of a family who copes with trauma in different ways. When the mother of the family is murdered by people who want revenge against Wenwu, the father, the three remaining members of the family all cope in different ways. We are going to look at Wenwu, Xialing, and Shang-Chi and study how each one of them responds to this trauma differently. And then we will look at the theme of the movie and what it teaches us about family. By the way, I apologize in advance for how I may be pronouncing these names. Wenwu is probably the most three-dimensional of the family. Because the 10 rings give someone immortality, he spent a good portion of 1,000 years as a conqueror. Once he meets Li, Shang-Chi's mother, he gives up the rings because, as he said, he's found something worth growing old for. What's most unique about Wenwu compared to the other villains in the series is that his story begins as a love story. He was a conqueror for so long, but he loved this woman so much he decided to put away the weapons he's probably worn for close to 950 years. That says a lot about how much he must love this woman. For a time, he was probably a good man and a good father. When she is killed, Wenwu resorts back to his old ways of conquering. But this time, he isn't driven by power. He is driven by revenge and regret. Revenge against all those people who murdered his wife, and regret that he ever gave up the rings in the first place. His desire for revenge changes the way Wenwu looks at his family. He looks at Shang-Chi not as a son, but as a weapon. And he looks at Xialing not as a daughter, but as a reminder of his deceased wife. He is no longer really a father to them, but a tyrannical leader. Instead of trying to strengthen his relationship with his children after Li's death, he drives his children to despise him, and they leave him eventually. Wenwu's quest to avenge his wife is ultimately what destroyed his family, not the criminals that killed Li. When Wenwu starts to hear the voice of his wife, he will do anything to what he thinks will free her. After all this time, he still doesn't see his children as his children, but as assets to help him free his wife. This only further distances himself from his children to the point where they will fight against him. So what can we learn from Wenwu and the way he handles trauma? As we see in many stories like The Last of Us Part 2, revenge is something that can corrupt a soul. Even though he may not have physically distanced himself from his children at first, he emotionally distances himself, which is arguably worse. As is the case with all three members of this family, the way you should handle family trauma is together as a family, and not let emotions like revenge corrupt you. Revenge is something that will not only destroy you, but everyone you love as well. Xialing handles trauma very differently than the way her brother does. Because Xialing was neglected by her father after the death of her mother, she has a different kind of hatred for her father than Shang-Chi. Instead of trying to distance herself from her father's ways as much as possible, she wanted to prove to him that she could carve out her own path and create an empire just as powerful as Wenwu's empire. Xialing isn't driven by revenge, but by resentment. She resented her father so much that she created her own criminal underground fighting ring. And I will admit, starting your own underground fighting ring at the age of 16 is insanely impressive. But she doesn't just want to prove to her father that he was wrong to neglect her, but also to Shang-Chi. When they last saw each other before the events of the movie, Shang-Chi promised his sister that he would return in 3 days from his mission. However, 3 days turned into 6 years, so he, like his father, abandoned her too. She wanted to prove to her father that she could create an empire too, and she wanted to prove to her brother that she didn't need him anymore, and that she could flourish without him. Now, unlike Shang-Chi, at the end of the movie, Xialing doesn't get any closure with her father. Wenwu gives the rings up to Shang-Chi, but not once does he show any remorse or regret for the way he treated his daughter. Granted, Xialing's story is not over, but with her taking over the 10 rings, I wouldn't be surprised if we see this still affect her going forward. So what can we learn about Xialing and the way she handles trauma? While Xialing is not bad like her father, we learn that sometimes strong hatred for a person can turn you into that person. She hated her father so much that in a way she wanted to become just like him and more to prove to him he was wrong for neglecting her. Had Wenwu treated his daughter like his daughter and not a burden, she could have gone down a healthier path and not led a criminal organization. As I said before, we don't know where her story is going to go, but it will certainly be interesting to see what happens now that she's in charge of the 10 rings. Shang-Chi takes a completely different path than his sister and father. Instead of getting deeper involved with criminals, he moves to the other side of the planet and wants to live a life that resembles nothing from his past. This is very very common for people with traumatic pasts. Instead of confronting it, they will try to avoid it at all costs. Shang-Chi is driven by two things in this movie. He hated his father so much that he removed himself completely from anything that resembles his previous life, and fears he will one day become his father. When he tells Katie about his past, he initially lies about how he killed the people involved with his mother's death out of fear that he will be like his father. When he and his sister are brought back into the fold, his anger for his father clearly hasn't gone away. After he escapes from his father, he makes a deal with himself that he will do anything to stop his father. He even tells Katie that he will kill him. This is a moment where Shang-Chi knows he's becoming more like his father and he's ashamed of it, but he doesn't care as much. He's fueled by defeating his father. In the final battle, he is initially still driven by wanting to kill his father, but when he has the chance to finally defeat him, he doesn't. He decides to choose empathy and love over vengeance. He pleads to his father not to stop destroying the gate, but he says his family needs him. These words get to his father, and in the last moments of his life, he gives the ring to his son in what is his way of apologizing for everything that has happened. Wenwu giving up the rings to Shang-Chi is what ultimately defeats the main Soul Eater at the end. So what can we learn from Shang-Chi and the way he handles trauma? We can take away the same lessons from Shang-Chi that we can from Luke Skywalker. Luke could have easily defeated his father in Return of the Jedi, but instead he chose love and compassion. And that decision was what led to the destruction of the Emperor and the redemption of Darth Vader. The same could be said about Shang-Chi. Instead of defeating his father, which he easily could have done, he chose love and compassion, which is what led to the destruction of the Soul Eater and the redemption of his father. So the lesson here is that love and compassion is always the path you should take, instead of a negative emotion like hate or revenge. Now, while there are individual lessons we can learn from all three members of the family, there is still an overarching lesson that could be taken away from the entire family. And that lesson would be that when a family faces tragedy, the proper and healthy way to handle that trauma is not individually, but together. Shang-Chi and Xialing come together at the end of the movie, and they are able to save the dragon and defeat the giant Soul Eater together. Wenwu believed that bringing his wife back from the dead was what would bring the family back together, but instead of focusing on the family he had lost, he should have focused on the family he still had. Had he done that, they could have still been a very happy family, even in the absence of his wife. Overcoming family trauma is not easy. Shang-Chi probably hadn't seen his father or sister for over 10 years. But when you confront those familial problems, usually your family will be stronger because of it. I loved this movie. Not only was it super entertaining, but it also had a lot to say about family and compassion. And to me, that is the most powerful theme a story can tell. I couldn't be more excited to see the future of Shang-Chi and Xialing. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos, and I will see you guys next time.